I was in Manhattan twice today. I was also in Brooklyn for a little while, where I was sitting on a bench writing a video about Zakir Naik accidentally refuting Islam, and I heard a guy say, "David Wood?" He was a street preacher in a wheelchair. He said that he watches my videos because he has some Muslim friends. So we talked for a while about how to get Muslims to think more critically about their religion and about how to convince American Christians not to be scared of preaching to Muslims. Later, I was in Manhattan. I didn't hear anything about the attack, even though it was going on while I was there. I received my first notification when I got back to the Bronx. At that point, I wasn't sure it was a terrorist attack. The notification said that shots were fired near the World Trade Center. But as additional information came in, I realized that we're dealing with vehicular jihad. Apparently, a terrorist rented a truck, drove it down a bike path, plowed into a crowd of people, killing at least 8, and then crashed the truck into a special needs school bus while shouting Allahu Akbar. If you're at all surprised by any of this, you obviously didn't watch the video I posted back in March where I said this. So now we're in a position to understand the rise of vehicular jihad. Years ago, Al-Qaeda set the bar for a successful terrorist attack pretty high. A successful terrorist attack was crashing planes into buildings or blowing up subway stations, mass casualties, go big or go home. And for years, aspiring jihadis attempted to recapture the success of the 9/11 attacks or the 7/7 bombings. And they failed. Over and over again, jihadis would get caught trying to buy bombs from undercover FBI agents. They would then go to prison, and instead of inflicting terror, they convinced us that the FBI is really on top of things. Eventually, a few jihadis concluded that successful small-scale attacks would be better than failed large-scale attacks. So instead of plotting to blow up a building, they would grab a knife or an axe or a gun or a small pressure cooker bomb and go stab or hack or shoot or blow up a few people in the name of Allah. These small-scale attacks wouldn't be as dramatic as the 9/11 attacks or the 7/7 bombings, but they were much more difficult to stop than large-scale attacks. But even though small-scale attacks are more difficult to prevent, they're not always impossible to stop. Police can keep an eye on people who buy guns or who download instructions to build pressure cooker bombs. If someone's carrying a backpack onto a train, police can tell him to open his bag. But how do you stop someone from getting in his SUV and driving it into a crowd of people? Until he's plowing through the people, he hasn't done anything. How do you stop someone from renting a U-Haul truck and heading towards a local parade? You can't. Now, you can watch the entire 12-minute video. If you do, ask yourself, what did David get wrong in any way? I was right on every single detail, right down to the truck rental, with two tiny exceptions. I said U-Haul truck when the actual terrorist rented his truck from Home Depot, and I said parade instead of crowd near a bike path. So why is it that we can predict not only that a terrorist attack will occur, but also the exact method of the terrorist attack with almost surgical precision? Well, we can predict these attacks because they're extremely predictable, thanks to the process of elimination. Muhammad ordered his followers to violently subjugate non-Muslims and hypocrites. Surah 33, verse 21 of the Quran says that Muhammad is the pattern of conduct for Muslims, and in Sahih al-Bukhari 2977, Muhammad proclaims, "I have been made victorious with terror." Terrorism was Muhammad's weapon of choice, and he's the pattern of conduct for his followers. Fortunately, most Muslims live far better lives than their prophet, but some, sadly, do strive to imitate him. But the world is very different from what it was during the time of Muhammad. An aspiring jihadi today has a number of options available to him. He might go out and join a foreign terrorist group, and there are numerous groups he might join. He might wage jihad locally, wherever he happens to live, in which case he'll have to decide whether to learn to build bombs, or buy a gun, or grab a knife, or get behind the wheel. He might support terrorists financially by sending them money or supplies, or he might wait for some future opportunity. For jihadis who decide to wage jihad locally, vehicular jihad is now the best option available. It can take years to learn to build bombs. Guns are difficult to acquire in certain areas. Knives can only do so much damage, but anyone can rent a truck and drive it into a crowd of people. Today, a terrorist drove a rental truck into a crowd of people because vehicular jihad is low risk, high payoff. Low risk of getting caught prior to the attack, but high payoff in terms of casualties. So what can we do about these attacks? No point in repeating myself. Here's what I said 7 months ago. Now, there are really only two things you can do to deal with jihad. You can refute the ideology that leads to the attacks, or you can try to minimize or prevent the attacks once they're in motion. Our leaders have done less than nothing when it comes to refuting the ideology of jihadis. I say less than nothing because nothing would have been keeping their mouths shut. They haven't kept their mouths shut. Instead, they've defended and promoted Muhammad and the Quran, the sources of jihadi doctrine. So the ideology of jihadis has spread. That leaves our leaders with the task of preventing individual attacks and trying to minimize the damage of attacks they can't prevent. Improvements in security and surveillance have been remarkably successful in preventing most large-scale attacks, but this has pushed jihadis towards small-scale attacks. Given the options available to small-scale jihadis who don't have access to guns, vehicular jihad is just as easy as a knife attack, but far more deadly. And that's why we're going to be seeing more of these attacks. So stay alert when you're in a crowded area and learn to refute Islam so that future generations don't have to depend on politicians to keep them safe from Muhammad's teachings. And what will our leaders, especially New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, do about this attack? They'll use all the media attention to tell us how wonderful Islam is and how evil we are for being concerned about Muhammad's clear commands to violently subjugate Jews, Christians, and other unbelievers. Are you sick of this nonsense yet? If so, the only way forward is to continue building an informed population of free people. Learn about jihad and then share what you learn until there are so many of us who know what we're talking about, the silly little voices of politicians and reporters will be drowned out in a chorus of sanity. To understand jihad, be sure to watch and share these videos. And since I discuss Islamic terrorism pretty regularly here, please don't leave without clicking the subscribe button for future updates. Also, as more news comes in about the attack, let me know what you think in the comments section.